Welcome back to Goosebump on the Midnight series, where the most terrifying haunted stories are told. Have you ever wondered if there are sounds that science cannot explain? Frequencies that do not belong to this world, echoes from another realm that only the chosen can hear? For James Evans, a top sound engineer in Beverly Hills and a brilliant sculptor of sound waves, the world was defined by logic, numbers, and the measurable physics of waveforms. He hated absolute silence. To him, it was the death of information, a denial of reality. But as fate would have it, he was about to be thrown into a world where the most terrifying silence was the one that held sounds that should not exist. James's modern, comfortable, and perfectly controlled life shattered with a single phone call. A strange number from Blackwood Province, a name he had tried to bury for 15 long years. On the other end of the line, an old, trembling voice delivered a devastating blow. His grandfather had passed away. But it wasn't a normal death from old age. He was found drowned in a rainwater jar in the backyard, a jar where the water level only came up to his knees. The absurdity of that death was a silent summons, forcing James to put everything aside and return to Stone Creek, the place where he was born, and the place from which he had fled. He returned not only to mourn the grandfather for whom he carried a heavy burden of guilt, but also to confront a past riddled with mysteries. He returned only to realize that his grandfather's death was just the beginning of a far more horrific nightmare. This journey back to his roots would pull him into the vortex of a 100-year curse, a tragedy that originated from the very place known as the Dragon's Eye. Could a man who believed only in logic and sound waves survive when faced with the mournful song of a vengeful spirit who had waited a century to claim her blood debt? Can science decipher terrifying spiritual phenomena when a land is bound by resentment? Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for your support. James Evans hated absolute silence. To him, a leading sound engineer in the bustling metropolis of Beverly Hills, silence was an unnatural state, an artificial void where sounds that should exist were forcefully eliminated. It was the death of information, a denial of reality. He lived in a world defined by frequencies, decibels, and the dancing sound waves on his computer screen. A world of logic and physics, where every phenomenon could be measured, analyzed, and explained. In his nearly perfectly soundproofed recording studio, a space into which he had poured a small fortune and 15 years of his career, the silence he created was of a different kind. It wasn't a void, but a backdrop of pure black velvet, a deliberate quiet designed to highlight the smallest acoustic details, the rough diamonds of life. It could be the delicate flutter of a dragonfly's wings in the morning sun, the meaningful sigh of an actress after a powerful line, or the subtle, distant cracking of a massive Antarctic ice sheet melting away. James lived for those sounds. He wasn't just a sound engineer, as his partners fondly called him, he was a sculptor of sound waves, an architect of invisible worlds. He was wearing his Bayer Dynamic DT 1990 Pro monitoring headphones, his eyes half closed, completely immersed in the world he was meticulously crafting. On the three curved computer monitors before him, the green waveforms of Pro Tools danced in complex patterns, like a genetic map. He was restoring the audio for an arthouse documentary by a French director about the rare Delacourse langur in Miami National Park. The work demanded ruthless precision, the patience of a saint. He had to filter out the whistle of wind through leaves at the wrong pitch, the hum of a commercial jet flying at 30,000 feet, the inadvertent dry cough of a cameraman who had tried to hold his breath. All of it just to preserve and glorify the distinctive call of the male langur summoning its troop, the precise rustle of the specific leaves it moved through, and even the thumping of its own heart, recorded by a special piezoelectric microphone attached to a tree trunk. That was James's world. A world of logic, order, and absolute control. A world that was comfortable, modern, and clean. A world that was geographically half a planet away from Stone Creek, Blackwood Province, and a whole universe away in his mind. Stone Creek. The name he had tried to bury deep in a corner of his memory, covering it with the concrete and skyscrapers of Beverly Hill. Just as he successfully isolated a troublesome noise at 1.2 kHz from the original recording, his iPhone, set to vibrate on the oak desk, let out a loud, violent buzz. The raw, out-of-place sound was like a knife slashing through the velvet curtain of audio he had so carefully woven. James frowned slightly, a wrinkle appearing between his thick eyebrows. He despised being disturbed when he was in his creative zone. He slowly removed his headphones, and the artificial, suffocating silence of the room rushed in, creating an uncomfortable pressure in his ears. He glanced at the phone screen. An unknown number. Area code 0206. Blackwood Province. James's heart skipped a beat, a freefall in his chest. The feeling was terrifyingly familiar. How long had it been since he'd seen that area code? 5 years, or 10? Probably 15. Since that fateful day when, as an ambitious 20-year-old, he had a spectacular falling out with his grandfather. He had insisted on selling the ancestral land down in the lowlands, the land the Evans family had tilled for generations, to get the money to move south, to pursue what his grandfather called that useless noise of the Westerners. He had nearly cut off all contact. His grandfather's rare calls in the first few years always began with silence and ended with a heart-wrenching sigh and accusations that he had forgotten his roots, abandoned the ancestors' graves. Gradually, the calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. James took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He pressed the green answer button. Hello? His voice was dry. The other end was silent for a few seconds, a silence not of emptiness, but one filled with the static of distance and interference. Only the distinctive howl of the mountain wind and the crackle of a weak signal came through. He was about to hang up, assuming it was a wrong number, when a trembling, elderly voice spoke, painfully familiar. James? Is that you, son? It's Mr. Tucker. Mr. Tucker. The memories flooded back. The man who had looked after the Evans family's ancestral home since James was a skinny kid running around naked in the rain, his skin tanned dark by the sun and wind. His voice was no longer the robust, resonant one from James's memory, the voice that used to call him home for dinner at dusk. Now it was thin and broken, like a frayed thread about to snap. Yes, it's me, James. Are you well, sir? It's been so long. What's wrong? James tried to keep his voice steady, but he could hear the tremor in it. Another heavy silence. This time, James could clearly hear Mr. Tucker take a deep, labored breath, a breath that carried with it exhaustion, sorrow, and a monumental effort to keep from crying. James. You have to come home. Immediately. Mr. Tucker's voice finally broke, choked with sobs. Your grandfather. He's gone. One word. Gone. The word was like a block of dark matter, sucking all the sound, air, and light from James's modern studio. His ears rang with a high-pitched, atonal whine. He gripped the edge of the desk, feeling the ground shift beneath him, as if the entire luxury apartment building were tilting. His grandfather. The man who, in James's mind, had always been an immutable symbol. A man as strong as an ancient ironwood tree on a mountaintop, a man he still pictured sitting on the porch of the old house, squinting through the smoke of his pipe, his gaze stern but hiding an unnamed sadness deep within. That man was gone. How? How could that be? Just last month He was about to say sent money, but the words caught in his throat, bitter. That money, transferred automatically every month, now felt like a cheap handout to his conscience, a futile attempt to buy the affection he had so callously neglected. They found him in the backyard. In the rainwater jar, James. Mr. Tucker was crying uncontrollably, his choked sobs traveling across thousands of miles. "It's so strange, son. The rainwater jar. The water was only up to his knees. But your grandfather. A drowning. In a nearly empty jar of water." The absurdity of it was a punch to James's gut, knocking the wind out of him. An adult, a strong man, how could he drown in such a shallow puddle of water? He couldn't ask any more questions. The thoughts in his head devolved into chaos. The sound waves on his screen blurred, melting into a meaningless tangle. He only vaguely heard Mr. Tucker's tearful instructions, that the family would wait for him to arrange the funeral, that he was the eldest grandson and had to be there. After hanging up, James sat frozen in his expensive Herman Miller chair. The modern studio, his pride and sanctuary, suddenly felt as cold and alien as a morgue. The green waveforms on the screen, the language he was most fluent in, now looked like the flatlining EKG of a dead heart. The call of the langur from the unfinished recording, which he'd been listening to, no longer sounded like a sound of nature. It now sounded like a lament, a mournful cry, a summons from some distant realm. He knew he had to go back. The 15-year escape from his past, from Stone Creek, from what he considered the shackles of superstition and backwardness, had finally ended with one fateful call. He had to return. Return to face the house he had abandoned, the people he had forgotten, and a death that had no explanation. That night, James's sleep was a series of jarring fragments, haunted by the ghostly audio frequency he had recorded. He dreamed he was no longer in his room but lost in a forest of limestone carts as sharp as daggers, the fog so thick he couldn't see his own hand. In that fog, he heard a lullaby. A woman's voice, sorrowful and plaintive, sang a tune that was alien yet terrifyingly familiar. The voice called a name, over and over.
Equal.
He tried to run from the singing, but his feet felt heavy, as if held by roots. He looked down in panic and realized with horror that what was wrapped around his ankles were not roots, but long, black, soaking wet strands of hair, emerging from the damp earth. He bolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, his heart beating like a festival drum. Outside, the sky was still pitch black, and the insects chirped on, indifferent, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, his grandfather's funeral was held according to local custom. James, as the sole male heir, had to oversee everything, from greeting guests to offering the ceremonial bowl of rice. He wore the white mourning clothes of coarse fabric, a white bandana around his head, standing like a soulless statue to receive condolences from villagers and relatives. Every face wore a look of sadness, but in many of the eyes that looked at him, James also read pity, morbid curiosity, and an unspoken fear. He felt like a lead actor thrust onto the stage of a tragic play for which he didn't know the lines, a play that had been performed over and over for generations in this village of Stone Creek. As the coffin was carried by the village's young men up the hill behind the house to the family burial plot, James scooped up a handful of reddish-brown earth and threw it onto the casket. The sound of the dry clumps of dirt hitting the wooden lid was hollow and final, an end to a life. From that moment on, he was officially the last man of the Evans line remaining in Stone Creek. A sense of loneliness and a heavy responsibility he had never known before settled on his shoulders, heavier than his Pelly case. Returning to the empty house after everyone had left, the atmosphere grew even colder and more somber. It was just him and Mr. Tucker, quietly cleaning up. While helping Mr. Tucker clear out his grandfather's room, James's eyes fell upon an old rosewood chest tucked modestly in a corner, under the bamboo bed frame. The chest was faded with age, but the carved dragons and phoenixes on its lid and sides were still exquisite and lively. It was secured with a brass lock shaped like a fish, now green with patina. "That chest belonged to your great-grandfather, Mr. Edward," Mr. Tucker said, noticing James's interest. His voice was full of reverence. "When your grandfather was alive, he wouldn't let anyone touch it. He said it was a family heirloom, holding the secrets of our lineage, and must be guarded carefully." Curiosity, fueled by the strange events of the previous night and his grandfather's illogical death, surged within James. A family heirloom? Or some terrible secret? He asked Mr. Tucker about the key, but the old man just shook his head, saying his grandfather never spoke of it, and no one knew where he kept it. James decided he had to open it. He didn't believe in mysterious heirlooms, but he had a strong gut feeling, an intuition telling him that the answers to his grandfather's death, to that ghostly moan, to the dream of black hair, might be lying dormant inside this wooden chest. He found a small iron poker in the kitchen, the kind used to stoke coals. With some clumsy mechanical skill and a strong pry, he broke the old brass lock. A dry click echoed in the silence of the room. The heavy lid popped open. A solemn, ancient scent wafted out. It was a mixture of old rosewood, decaying paper, and a faint hint of mothballs. Inside, there was no gold or treasure as he had half imagined. There were only a few stacks of old documents and books tied carefully with twine, a few faded black and white photographs, and a small, beautifully carved wooden box. James carefully picked up a photograph. The image was faded, the corners torn and frayed, but it was still quite clear. It showed two people, posing in front of a stilt house. One was a man in his 30s, wearing a Western-style suit, his hair parted and slicked back. He had a strong face and intelligent eyes, but with a hint of distant pride. James immediately recognized him as his great-grandfather, Edward Evans, whom he only knew from old altar portraits. Standing beside him, somewhat shy but not at all overshadowed, was a gypsy ethnic girl. She didn't have the glamorous beauty of city ladies, but she exuded a wild, rustic charm. Her thick black hair was neatly plaited into two long braids. Her eyes were large, bright, and held a mix of pride and sadness. She wore a traditional indigo outfit, and on her wrist, standing out against her fair skin, was a silver bracelet with intricate carvings. James put the photo down and picked up the small wooden box. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a piece of faded red velvet, was half of a silver bracelet. It had the same vine-like pattern as the one on the girl's wrist in the photograph. The other half was missing. The break was clean and sharp, not worn by time, but as if it had been snapped by a powerful, violent force. Finally, he opened the old journals. They were the diaries of his great-grandfather Edward, written in an old style of the national script with a dip pen. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was still elegant and skilled. James sat down on the cold earthen floor, carefully turning the fragile pages, and began to read. As the afternoon shadows stretched across the doorway, James became completely engrossed in the tragic story from over a century ago. A story of love, betrayal, and a curse born from resentment. The first entries in Edward's diary were full of the excitement and romanticism of a Western-educated intellectual returning to his homeland for the first time after years of study in England and France. He wrote about the wild, majestic beauty of the Blackwood Mountains, about the unique customs of the local people with the curiosity of an ethnographer and the slight condescension of an educated man who considered himself civilized. Then, Mari appeared, and the tone of his writing changed completely. March 15, 5th year of Emperor XXX. I was tormented by a vicious jungle fever, lying unconscious in a small, temporary hut I'd built in the forest to study medicinal herbs. I thought I would perish in this desolate place, but then she came like a miracle. Mari. She is the daughter of the village shaman. They say she can speak with the forest gods. She did not say much, only quietly cared for me. She used leaves I had never seen in any textbook, brewing a dark, bitter medicine that worked wonders. Her hands were cool on my burning forehead. In my delirium, I saw her not as a mortal, but as a mountain fairy from the old tales. The following pages were filled with images of Mari, described with a voice of infatuation and passion. Edward wrote of her deep knowledge of plants and animals, her ability to predict the weather by looking at the sky, and her clear, high-pitched singing voice as she picked tea leaves on the hills. Their love blossomed as naturally as a wildflower, but it was also fraught with conflict and destiny. On one side was the eldest son of the prestigious Evans family, a Western-educated intellectual destined to marry a high-society lady from the lowlands to consolidate his family status. On the other was a gypsy girl from the mountains, a white-skinned savage in the derogatory eyes of the city people at the time, a girl who lived by the laws of the forest, not the laws of feudal society. July 20th. I gave Mari the silver bracelet, a precious item I bought from a talented Yao silversmith at the market fair. I took her hand and told her that this bracelet was a testament to our love, that only when these mountains crumbled to dust, when this gold faded, only when this bracelet was broken in two, would my love for her end. She said nothing, only cried. Her smile then, mingled with tears of happiness, was more beautiful than the white pear blossoms after a spring rain. Reading this, James's hand unconsciously tightened around the cold half of the silver bracelet in his pocket. He felt a stone settle heavily in his chest. He turned the page, and the tone of the diary shifted dramatically. The romance and poetry gave way to anxiety, inner turmoil, and guilt. The pressure from his family in the lowlands grew. The letters from England became more frequent, urging Edward to return immediately to arrange the planned marriage. September 10th. My parents have sent their final letter. The words were like lashes of a whip. They said if I do not return, I will be disowned, my name struck from the family records. They have arranged an undeniable marriage for me with the daughter of the provincial governor. A glorious future, a political career awaits me. But what about Mari? She is my whole world in these mountains, my freedom, the purest love I have ever known. What am I to do? My heart is a tangled mess. And then, the fateful entry, the page where the handwriting was scratched and trembling. October 2nd. Mari gave me devastating news. She is with child. More than 2 months along. The world collapsed beneath my feet. In that moment of cowardice, I did not see the child as the fruit of our love, but as the evidence of my sin, an indelible disgrace to the Evans lineage. I was terrified. I became a man I myself despised. I said the cruelest things. I denied her, denied my own blood. She did not cry, did not scream, only looked at me with eyes of absolute disappointment. Those eyes will haunt me for the rest of this life and all lives to come. James felt his chest tighten. He could imagine the desperation, the heartbreak of that young woman. To be so cruelly rejected by the person she loved and trusted most. He turned to the last page. Edward's handwriting was shaky, sloppy, blurred in many places by tears, as if written in a state of utter panic. Tonight, a violent storm rages. Mari is gone. They say she went towards the Dragon's Eye well, carrying nothing. The silver bracelet was no longer on her wrist. The next morning, they found her body at the bottom of the well. She had taken her own life. Oh, God, what have I done? Last night, I dreamed of her. She stood at the foot of my bed, her face pale, her long hair disheveled and soaking wet. In her hand, she held half of the silver bracelet. She said nothing, she only sang. A lullaby. The lullaby for our unborn child. God, save me. Save my wretched soul. James slammed the diary shut. His hands were trembling. Everything was now crystal clear. The wail he had heard. The lullaby in his dream. The name Edward being called over and over. It wasn't some anonymous ghost. It was Mari. The vengeful spirit of Mari. And she didn't just haunt his great-grandfather Edward. Her curse had lasted a century, passed down from one generation to the next, demanding a blood debt. Part 3, The 100-Year Curse. The words of old Mother Naya were like a signed death warrant, merely waiting for the day of execution, hanging suspended over James's head. His vague sense of dread had now morphed into a clear and concrete terror. He was the next target. The curse wasn't a folktale, it was a mechanism that operated with the cold, cruel precision of a machine. As soon as he got home, James dove into the Evans family's ancestral records, a book his grandfather had kept carefully in a compartment of the family altar. The leather-bound book was ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. He turned each page, tracing the names written in the flamboyant, dragon and phoenix script of previous generations. Next to the name of his great-grandfather, Edward Evans, was his great-granduncle, Alucard Evans, the son Edward had with his official wife, the one for whom he had abandoned Mari. James read the small note beside Alucard's name. Died at age 35, drowned while boating on the Glimmer River during a flood. A chill went down James's spine. He remembered the stories Mr. Tucker and the village elders used to tell, that Anne was an expert swimmer, like an otter, and could not possibly have drowned so senselessly, especially when his boat capsized only a few strokes from the shore. He turned the page. His grandfather's generation. His grandfather, Daniel Evans, had an older brother named Michael Evans. James read the note beside this name, the ink now heavily faded. Died at age 17, slipped and fell into a stream after a heavy rain. A healthy 17-year-old, familiar with the local streams and terrain, dead in such a trivial way. And now his own grandfather, Daniel Evans, dead at 78, drowned in a jar with water barely up to his knees. One man from each generation. And death always came from water. The Glimmer River, the stream, the jar. The pattern was so clear it was undeniable, chilling him to the bone. This was no coincidence. This was a pre-programmed fate, a sentence carried out methodically through the generations. James slumped to the cold floor, cold sweat soaking the collar of his shirt. This wasn't a typical haunting, not some random poltergeist. This was a systematic hunt, a meticulously planned revenge spanning decades. Mari didn't just want to haunt them, she wanted to completely wipe out the male line of the family that had betrayed and killed her and her unborn child. She wanted them to pay with the very thing they had taken from her, their sons. From that point on, Mari's terror entered a new phase, more brazen and direct. It was as if she knew that James knew everything. She no longer needed to hide or be subtle. Water, as Old Mother Naya had said, became a tangible enemy within his own home. On rainy nights, water didn't just leak from the old tile roof, it seeped from the rammed earth walls themselves, rising up from the floor, making the entire house damp, cold, and smell of mud like a tomb. The faucets in the bathroom and kitchen would turn on by themselves, water gushing out in the middle of the night, creating a horrifying gurgling sound. One time, James was asleep when a bone-chilling cold woke him. He snapped on his phone's flashlight and was horrified to find his entire room flooded with a thin layer of water, his belongings floating about, even though there wasn't a drop of rain outside. The water seemed to be generating itself from nothing, from Mari's sheer resentment. And then, he saw her. Not in a dream, but with his own two eyes. It was a full moon night, the silver light casting an eerie, magical glow over the garden. Unable to sleep, James stood by the window, his heart heavy with anxiety. And he saw a figure sitting on the edge of the dragon's eye well. Not a hazy white shadow, not an illusion. It was a distinct form. It was Mari. She still wore the indigo gypsy outfit from the photograph, but now it was tattered, faded, and soaking wet, clinging to her body. Her long black hair was no longer neatly braided but hung loose, covering her entire back, dripping dark, foul-smelling water onto the stone edge of the well. She sat there, her back to James, her head bowed slightly, her shoulders trembling as if she were crying. But no, she was singing. The familiar lullaby rose again, not through headphones this time, but directly in the air, chillingly clear and hauntingly beautiful. James stood frozen, afraid to even breathe, the blood in his veins turning to ice. He wanted to scream, to run, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. Mari seemed to sense his gaze. She slowly stopped singing. Then, with a terrifying slowness, she turned her head. James would never, ever forget that face until the day he died. It was the same beautiful, proud face from the photograph, but it was twisted. It was deathly pale, bloodless. The skin was bloated and pasty, like a corpse that had been submerged in water for a long time. And the eyes. The large, bright, proud eyes were gone. In their place were two deep, empty, soulless black pits. But from within those sockets, a hatred, a suffering that had curdled into absolute vengeance, glowed like a hellfire that had been smoldering for 100 years. She stared straight at James, unblinking. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out, only a stream of black, foul-smelling water trickled from the corner, dripping onto her drenched clothes. Then, her form slowly dissolved into the air, like a wisp of smoke, as if she had never been there at all. James collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, retching. He knew. He knew for certain that he couldn't run. The confrontation was inevitable, and it was coming very soon. The climax of the terror came one night when, exhausted and mentally broken, James had just drifted off. He felt a cold, slimy, wet hand grip his ankle. He jolted awake, and in the dim glow of the nightlight, he saw Mari standing at the foot of his bed, her body bent over, her long hair cascading down, nearly touching his face. Her pale, bloated face was just inches from his. He could smell the mud, the stench of decomposition. He let out a blood-curdling scream, a scream of primal terror, and kicked out with all his might. The specter vanished, leaving a puddle of filthy black water on the floor and an icy coldness on his ankle. The grip of her hand left a faint bruise that was still visible the next morning. James knew he was running out of time. He had to act before he either went insane or was killed. He had to pay the debt, as old Mother Naya had said. The key was the silver bracelet, the symbol of a broken promise. He had to find the other half. It had to be somewhere in this house. He began a desperate search. Finally, with hope nearly gone, he found it inside an old iron box full of French colonial-era land deeds. The other half of the bracelet, carefully wrapped in a piece of faded yellow silk. It had oxidized to almost black, but the vine pattern perfectly matched the half he already had. Great-grandfather Edward hadn't thrown it away. He had kept it. Perhaps in a late, hopeless act of penance. James placed the two halves side by side on the table. They fit together perfectly. A broken promise. He had to mend it. But not with a silversmith's fire, but with something else, something more symbolic, as old Mother Naya had hinted. Your bloodline owes her a life. He looked at his hand. The blood of the Evans family. The blood of the one who had committed the sin. Just then, as if arranged by fate, dark clouds rolled in, covering the clear blue sky in minutes. The wind began to howl through the mountain passes, carrying a cold mist. A massive storm, an unnaturally violent storm for the dry season, was about to break. James looked outside. The sky was black as ink, lightning tearing across the cliffs like cracks in the heavens. He knew this was no ordinary storm. This was the sign. Mari was coming. This time, she would unleash 100 years of resentment to claim her final debt. The storm descended upon Stone Creek Valley with an unimaginable fury, as if nature itself was colluding with Mari's hatred. Rain didn't fall in drops but cascaded down as if from giant, overturned buckets, a white, violent sheet. The wind roared through the mountain passes, creating a ghastly, wailing sound like the cries of 1,000 trapped souls. The true horror, however, came from the well in the backyard. James looked out through the shattered window. The water in the Dragon's Eye well, once calm and clear, was now boiling furiously like a giant cauldron in hell. It was no longer clear, but a thick, inky black, like dried blood. The water rose unnaturally fast, spilling over the stone rim, turning the entire backyard into a stinking, black lake. Inside the house, the haunting exploded. All the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness, punctuated only by the blinding flashes of lightning. Mari's lullaby was no longer a lament but a furious, enraged scream, echoing from everywhere, battering his ears, his mind, threatening to tear him apart.
Give it back. Give back my life. Give me my child.
A heavy wooden door was ripped from its hinges, flying past James's head and embedding itself in the opposite earthen wall. The ancestral altar burst into flames, not the normal red-orange of fire, but a ghostly, cold blue. James knew Mari was trying to corner him, to terrorize him into running outside, toward the well, toward the death that was destined for him. In the midst of the chaos and terror, his mind became strangely clear, the calm that comes before death. He remembered old Mother Naya's words.
You cannot fight water. You must yield to it.
Resistance was futile. He had to perform the ritual of atonement. He fumbled in the dark for the two halves of the silver bracelet. He needed blood. His own blood. He saw a shard of a broken vase on the floor, glinting in the lightning. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and sliced a deep cut across his left palm. Fresh blood welled up, hot and red. Gritting his teeth against the pain, James pressed the two halves of the bracelet into his bleeding palm, letting his blood, the blood of the Evans line, soak them. He mumbled, not a prayer for his life, but a sincere confession. On behalf of my great-grandfather Edward Evans, on behalf of my entire bloodline, I confess our sin. The sin of betrayal. The sin of cowardice. The sin of denial. I accept it all. He had to get to the well. It was where the tragedy began, and it had to be where it ended. James threw open the main door. Wind and rain lashed his face. The backyard had become a sea of black water. And in the middle of it stood Mari. She was no longer a phantom. She was a solid, towering figure in the heart of the storm, powerful and terrifying. Her long hair flew in the wind like a nest of vipers. Her empty eye sockets now burned with a blood-red light, locked onto him. As James took his first step into the icy water, Mari let out an inhuman roar. The black water churned, and dozens of hands made of water rose up, trying to grab his legs, to pull him down into the mire of hatred. He struggled forward, each step a monumental effort. He didn't look at the spectral hands, he stared directly into Mari's burning red eyes. He showed no fear, only repentance and resolve. When he was just a few feet from her, he stopped. He ceased his struggle. Instead, he slowly knelt down in the bone-chilling black water. He raised the hand holding the blood-soaked silver bracelet. He screamed, his voice hoarse, overpowering the roar of the storm. Mari. I did not come here to fight you. I came to pay the debt. He recounted the story from the diary, the pain and ultimate regret of his great-grandfather. My ancestor was wrong. An unforgivable mistake. For the sake of hollow honor and family pressure, he denied you, denied his own child. It is a debt that cannot be paid with money, only with sincerity. He opened his palm, revealing the silver bracelet, now mended by his red blood. A promise was broken, and now I use the blood of this family to make it whole again. I do not ask you to spare my life. I only ask that you accept this late apology, let your hatred be released, let your soul and the soul of your unborn child find peace. With all his remaining strength, James threw the bracelet toward Mari. It flew through the rain, glinting faintly before falling into the black water at her feet. A terrifying silence. The storm seemed to pause. Mari stopped screaming. She looked down at the silver bracelet sinking into the dark water. The red glow in her eyes slowly faded. Then, one final scream tore through the valley. But this time, it was not a scream of hatred, but of ultimate pain, of release after a century trapped in the chains of vengeance. Her form began to dissolve, melting into the water, into the rain. The churning water grew calm. The storm subsided. To the east, a faint sliver of dawn appeared, chasing away the darkness. James collapsed in the now clear water, utterly spent. But he knew he had survived. The 100-year curse was finally broken. Epilogue. 6 months later. The village of Stone Creek had returned to its inherent peace and quiet. James had renovated the Evans family home, it was now welcoming and cozy, free of its former gloom. He didn't sell the house or return to his rising career in Beverly Hills. He decided to stay. He realized his escape from Stone Creek was really an escape from himself, from his roots. He turned one room into a small, modern recording studio, not for lucrative commercial projects, but for a project of his own, to record and preserve the disappearing sounds of the village and the forest. He recorded the shamanic songs of the old women, the gurgle of the stream over rocks, the call of birds at dawn, the creak of the bamboo water wheels. He wanted to preserve the soul of this land, the soul he had once rejected. The Dragon's Eye well was once again clear and tranquil. Villagers still came for water daily, but now their eyes held not fear, but reverence. The story of Mari's curse and its resolution, as told by Mr. Tucker, became a new village legend, a lesson in faithfulness and repentance. James became the guardian of that story, ensuring it would never be forgotten. He understood that the past, no matter how painful or dark, cannot be buried or erased. It must be faced, understood, and respected. Sometimes, on clear, moonlit nights, James still brings his recorder and sets it by the well. He no longer wears headphones to analyze the sounds. He just sits there, quietly gazing into the water, which reflects the starry sky like a mirror. He no longer hears the screams or wails of hatred. But if he listens very carefully, in the near-absolute silence of the mountain night, he can sometimes hear, or perhaps feels that he hears, a distant lullaby. It is very soft, very sad, but no longer filled with resentment. A lullaby for a child who never had the chance to be born. A lullaby of forgiveness. The curse may have ended. But the story of it, and of the karmic debt between the living and the dead, will echo forever with the mountain winds and stone cliffs of Stone Creek. The story ends here. Thank you for your interest and for listening to our channel's stories. Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for your support.